The life of Orpheus is veiled in such profound obscurity and uncertainty that little can be stated with confidence, and even what little can be said remains unreliable and unstable. History shows that some of the most brilliant minds of the past have suffered the same fate. Figures like Homer and Euclid, whose enduring works continue to enlighten and delight humanity, yet whose personal histories are mostly lost in the shadows of time. Nowhere, however, is this lack of clarity more pronounced than in the case of Orpheus. His name is renowned and honored throughout antiquity, possibly with the lone exception of Aristotle, but the details of his life have largely been erased by time's decay. Almost nothing can be declared with certainty regarding his origin, age, parentage, homeland, or social standing. One thing alone seems generally accepted, that there once lived a man named Orpheus, son of Eurydice, a native of Thrace, and descended from royal lineage. He is remembered as the founder of Greek theology, the guide of their way of life and moral understanding, the first among prophets, and the chief of poets. He is said to have been born of a muse, to have instructed the Greeks in their sacred rites and mysteries, and to have served as a wellspring of wisdom, one from which the divine inspiration of Homer and the philosophies of Pythagoras and Plato would later emerge. His music, played on the lyre, was so powerful that it drew the wild beasts, trees, and stones toward him, halted the flow of rivers, and softened even the stern ruler of the underworld, testimonies to which all the literature of antiquity bears witness. Since such details are confirmed by widespread tradition, it is worthwhile to delve more deeply into the history of the original Orpheus, as well as the other notable figures who later bore the same revered name. The earliest and true Orpheus was a poet of Thrace, and according to many sources, a student of Linus. Suidas places his era around the time when the Athenian monarchy came to an end. Some believe he lived before the Trojan War and spanned either 11 or 9 generations. The term generation, however, as noted by certain interpreters, may represent a span of 7 years. If this definition is accepted, it provides a basis in reality for calculating the duration of his life. While some ancient authorities argue that the term signifies a span of 30 years, this alternative view seems implausible and need not be pursued further. Accepting the former calculation, Orpheus would have lived 63 years, a lifespan considered ominous by astrologers, particularly for those of great genius, as seen in the lives of Cicero and Aristotle. According to ancient legend, the poet met a violent end, torn apart by Ciconian women. Plutarch remarks that this event led the Thracians to adopt the custom of striking their wives, as a form of vengeance for his death. In a vision described by Hieros Pamphilius in Plato's writings, the soul of Orpheus, when fated to be reborn, chose to inhabit the body of a swan rather than be born again from a woman, driven by a deep resentment towards the female sex due to the brutal nature of his demise. Various explanations are offered for the cause of his destruction. Some say it followed his involvement in unmanly affections after the passing of Eurydice. Others claim he was killed by women in a drunken frenzy, enraged that he had influenced men to abandon their relationships with them. Another tradition, found in the account of Pausanias, holds that after Eurydice's death, Orpheus wandered to Aornus in Thesprotia, a place known for calling back the souls of the dead. There, he is said to have summoned Eurydice, but, unable to keep her, he ended his own life. Nightingales were said to have nested on his grave, singing songs more beautiful than any of their kind. Another tale suggests his death came from neglecting to honor Bacchus in his hymns, though this seems unlikely, since several of his hymns were in fact dedicated to that god under various names. One version reports that Venus herself delivered him into the hands of the Ciconian women as punishment, since his mother Calliope had failed to judge fairly between Venus and Proserpine in their dispute over Adonis. Still others claim he perished by a bolt of lightning, a version supported by Pausanias and echoed by Diogenes, who quoted a couplet said to have been composed by the Muses. Here, by the Muses placed, with golden lyre, great Orpheus rests, destroyed by heavenly fire. The sacred rites later, known as Thracian mysteries, are said to have taken their name from this Thracian poet, who is credited with introducing religious ceremonies and sacred worship into Greece. Those who conducted initiations into these mysteries were known as Orphiotelesti, or followers of Orpheus. Lucian also credits him with bringing astrology and the magical arts to the Greeks. As for the famous tale of him charming wild beasts and trees with the music of his lyre, Palaephatus offers a more rational explanation. He recounts that wild Bacchic women had seized livestock and other necessities before retreating into the mountains for several days. When the local men, fearful for their families and uncertain of the women's fate, sought help, Orpheus was summoned and asked to devise a way to draw them back. By playing his lyre in harmony with the rites of Bacchus, he enticed the frenzied women to return. As they descended from the hills, they carried rods and branches of many kinds, and to the eyes of those watching, it appeared as though the very forest was moving. From this scene, the legendary tale of his power over nature was born. The fame of Orpheus grew so immense that the Greeks came to regard him as a divinity. It was said that after his death, his severed head gave oracles on the island of Lesbos. According to tradition, when the Thracian women tore him apart, his head and lyre were cast into the river Hebrus and carried out to sea. Lucian describes how, as the current bore them along, the head continued to sing, accompanied by the lyre whose strings were stirred by the wind, creating a mournful harmony like a funeral song. Eventually, both head and lyre reached Lesbos, where the head was buried, and the lyre was placed in the temple of Apollo, remaining there for some time. Later, Neanthus, the son of the tyrant Pittacus, became fascinated by the lyre, having learned that it could draw wild animals and trees with its sound. Longing to possess it, he secretly bribed the priest and replaced the lyre in the temple with an imitation, keeping the true one for himself. Fearing he might be discovered, he chose to flee the city at night, hiding the instrument under his cloak. Though untrained and unskilled, he began to play it, imagining that he was producing divine music and imagining himself to be the heir of Orpheus's power. But the sound attracted a pack of dogs, who, stirred by the unfamiliar noise, attacked and killed him on the spot. The deeper meaning of this tale was explored by Proclus in his commentary on Plato's Republic. He suggested that Orpheus was said to have died in many ways because the people of that time could only grasp fragments of his knowledge. They were not capable of receiving the full and perfect scope of Orphic wisdom. However, the islanders of Lesbos were said to have received the greatest share of his melody, which might explain why his head was believed to have come to rest there. Such myths, Proclus argued, were told about Orpheus much like they were about Bacchus, whose sacred rites Orpheus once served. Beyond the original Orpheus of Thrace, there were others who bore the same name. One, said to be either Arcadian or a Ciconian from Bisulcia in Thrace, was considered older than both Homer and the Trojan War. He composed mythic tales and epigrams and was believed by some, including Giraldus, to have authored the hymns attributed to Orpheus. However, others such as Vossius and Eschenbach assign these hymns to Onomacritus, also known as the fourth Orpheus, from Crotonia. A third Orpheus was said to be from Odrysius, a city near the Hebrus River in Thrace, though his very existence was denied by Dionysius in the account preserved by Suedos. The fourth Orpheus, identified with Onomacritus, came from Crotonia and lived during the time of Pisistratus. He was active around the period of the 50th Olympiad and is likely the true author of the hymns in question. He is also said to have written works such as the Decennalia, the Initiations, and possibly even the Argonautica, which survives under Orpheus's name, along with other Orphic texts. Some of these writings, however, were attributed by Cicero to Cecrops, a Pythagorean philosopher. The final Orpheus, known as the Cameronian, was praised for his poetic talent. He is also remembered as the figure whose descent into the underworld became widely known and retold. And with that, the tradition surrounding the life and lives of Orpheus comes to a close. Let the focus now shift from uncertain speculations to clear understanding, from the tangled maze of fables to the more solitary but serene path of truth. In exploring the theology of Orpheus, the most trustworthy sources are found in the writings of the later Platonists, who alone preserve the authentic teachings on this profound and long-forgotten subject. Popular mythologies offer little help here, and any attempt to interpret the theology or hymns of Orpheus through the lens of modern theories would be as futile as seeking the origin of a mighty river by chasing it through its most distant and winding branches. One modern author, in an effort to conform to contemporary assumptions, argues that the Orphic hymns merely deify parts of nature, not as beings animated by distinct intelligences, but as passive forms of lifeless matter. Such a view fits easily with the mindset of many present-day thinkers, who go so far as to reject anything beyond the physical realm. Even those who allow for the existence of one immaterial supreme being often deny the involvement of intermediate intelligences in the ordering of the universe. And yet, this doctrine, of a hierarchical structure of divine agencies, is both deeply philosophical and entirely compatible with traditional revelation. For the person who limits understanding to sensory experience alone, perception ends at surface appearances. Such a perspective creates a vast void in the structure of reality and spreads the divine essence thinly across the material world, imagining it fragmented into every atom and constantly shifting into countless visible forms. But in the view of the ancients, the divine is a boundless and ever-flowing source, endlessly pouring forth life into all things. From this perspective, the universe holds within it every kind of being, visible and invisible deities, the radiant host of daimons, the noble ranks of elevated souls, and human beings who attain happiness through wisdom and virtue. In this theological system, the universal soul does not limit its power to the ocean, stopping where the sea ends. Instead, the air and the ether are alive with soul, animating the heavens and directing the stars in their unceasing, orderly revolutions. These celestial bodies, reflecting the nature of intellect, which seeks nothing outside itself, move in continuous circles around the central sun. Some beings merely exist, others possess life. Some have sensation, others reason, and a few embody life and intelligence in their fullness. To understand the Orphic teaching on the existence and role of subordinate intelligences, one must look to the reasoning of the Platonists. Their argument begins with a fundamental principle. Among all beings, some must only move others, some must only be moved, and some must occupy the middle position, both moving and being moved. The highest in order are those that cause motion without being moved themselves. Next are those that move themselves, then come those that both move and are moved, and finally, those that are solely moved by others. Self-moving beings, belonging to the second class, are characterized by constant change and transition in life. But because they are defined by motion, they require a more ancient and unchanging cause, one that remains always the same, untouched by the cycles of time and rooted instead in the enduring essence of eternity. It is necessary that the third kind of being, the one that both moves and is moved, must depend on a self-moving nature. For the self-motive is the source of motion for what is moved by another, just as that which is itself unmoved implants the very power of motion in all things. Likewise, those beings which are merely passive must rely on others that, while also moved by something else, possess the power to initiate motion. The whole chain of existence must be complete, connected throughout by proper intermediaries, descending in an unbroken and ordered series from the highest principle to the lowest. All bodies fall under the class of those that are moved only. They are passive by nature, lacking in any internal power, being characterized by qualities such as extension, division, and weight. Among incorporeal things, some are divisible in relation to bodies, while others remain completely unaffected by the limitations of the material world. Those incorporeals which are tied to matter, whether they are qualities or forms, belong to the class that both move and are moved. Since they are immaterial, they do share in the power to move, but since they are divided through matter, they fall short of incorporeal perfection. They are weighed down by material inertia and require the presence of a higher, self-moving principle. Where then is this self-motive essence to be found? Anything burdened with magnitude and bound to matter must either act only or be acted upon. But, as already shown, this intermediate order must be preceded by a nature that is truly self-moving. Therefore, one must conclude that such a nature exists, free from the limitations and passivity of material form, not only above the heavens, but even within the ever-shifting elements. From this principle comes the origin of bodily motion. This essence is none other than soul, which imparts life and motion to animals, and even casts a reflection of self-motion onto the otherwise inert material world. If the self-motive is more primary than what is moved by another, and if soul is in its essence self-motive, then soul must be prior to body. All motion found in the material world thus flows from soul and its inherent power. The heavens, with their vast expanse and natural circular motion, must therefore be governed by souls more ancient and nobler than the bodies they animate. According to the Platonic tradition, these souls organize the universe and all its parts through their internal capacity to move, thereby enlivening everything that would otherwise remain inanimate. Every cause of motion must operate either rationally or irrationally, that is, through the stable, guided laws of reason or through the random impulses of unreason. Yet the steady movements of the celestial bodies, their harmonious arrangements, and the astonishing precision of their paths clearly show that they are directed by a rational principle. If the universe is thus governed by a rational and intellectual soul, and if everything in eternal motion is guided by such a soul, it leads to a further question. Does this soul possess intelligence and perfection by its very nature, or by participation? If by essence, then every soul must be intellectual, since every soul is naturally self-moving. But if intelligence is received by participation, then there must be a nature more ancient than soul, one that acts purely through its own energy, and whose very essence is intellect, containing within itself the eternal forms in complete unity. The soul, being essentially rational, would thus receive its intellect from this higher source. And intellectual activity would be of two kinds, one residing primarily in the divine intellect itself, and the other secondarily within the soul, as its offspring. Furthermore, there is even a kind of intellectual illumination within body, received to the extent that bodily nature allows. For how else could the celestial spheres preserve their eternal circular motion, maintaining their form and unchanging power, unless they somehow shared in an intellectual nature? Soul may be the eternal source of motion, but the cause of unchanging identity, of lasting order, and of turning unstable motion into eternal, self-same revolution must be something even more ancient than soul. Body, and all things perceived through the senses, belong to the category of beings moved by something other than themselves. Soul, by contrast, is self-moving, containing within itself the entire system of corporeal motions in a unified and continuous way. Yet above the soul stands an intellect that remains unmoved. It is essential not to imagine this immaterial nature as anything lifeless, inert, or devoid of vitality. Rather, it is to be understood as the original source of all motion and the root of all life, both the life that constantly returns into itself and the life that extends outward into other things, which, by this outward extension, becomes secondary and incomplete. All beings, therefore, are rooted in unity by means of intellect and soul. Intellect exists with a single and undivided essence, while soul takes on a mental form, and the world's body possesses a vital character. The first cause transcends even intellect, yet it is intellect that first receives the divine nature. The soul partakes in divinity insofar as it requires intellect to function. As for the body that receives a soul of this nature, it too may be called divine, to the extent that bodily nature allows. The light of intellect descends from the highest principle to the furthest extremes, and though it passes through matter's dense and shadowy depths, it is never entirely extinguished. From this, it is reasonable to understand that not only the universe as a whole, but each of its unchanging parts is alive and endowed with intellect, bearing a likeness to the universe itself. Each part, by virtue of its internal composition and relationship to other beings, can be seen as a universe in miniature. Thus, according to the ancient theological tradition, there exists a single soul of the universe, followed by a multitude of other souls that derive their life from the universal one, and which arrange the world's parts into harmonious order. There is likewise one universal intellect, shared by all souls, and above all, a single supreme deity who embraces all within his infinite being. Surrounding this divinity is a host of lesser gods who distribute intellectual realities along with their corresponding souls and govern all aspects of the world, serving as the continuous sources of its order, unity, and agreement. It would be illogical to assume that natural things have the power to reproduce their kind, while the universe and the first beings lack such generative force. Barrenness can only belong to the lowest and least perfect natures, never to the highest. Following this understanding, the world was populated with divine beings beneath the ultimate craftsman of all, each fulfilling the function proper to its rank, guided by a higher principle. In this system, there are two overarching worlds, the intelligible and the sensible. From this duality emerge three divine creative principles, from which proceed countless ranks and distinctions among the gods, some belonging to the realm of intellect, some above the world, some within it, some celestial, and some responsible for bringing things into being. Among these divine orders are guardians, creators, those who raise souls upward, those who embrace all things, those who bring works to completion, givers of life, changeless powers, sovereign agents, judges, purifiers, and more. Alongside each of these divine figures is assigned a specific retinue of angels, spirits, and heroic beings. For as it was taught, every god is accompanied by a host appropriate to his nature, over which he presides and through which his divinity is revealed. These gods were also distinguished by their qualities, some being identified as male, others as female. The purpose of this division, subtle and profound, was to reflect the richness of divine activity in its many forms. The division into male and female encompasses within itself the entire fullness of the divine orders. For the source of steadfast power and identity, the provider of being, and that which grants to all things the initial turning back toward their origin, is understood as belonging to the masculine realm. In contrast, that which sends forth diverse unfoldings and divisions, the measures of life, and the generative powers that arise from within itself, falls under the feminine aspect. This division is the framework by which the whole divine order may be embraced, as is seen in the account of the creation, where the gods are addressed collectively through this dual structure of generated natures. And this form of division is especially suited to the present system, because the cosmos is filled with gods of both kinds. At the furthest ends of this hierarchy, heaven is paired with earth, following the relationship of male to female. The heavens impart motion, bestowing qualities and powers upon all things, while the earth, receiving these influences from above, becomes fertile and brings forth all manner of plants and animals. Among the celestial gods, some are marked as belonging to the male order, while others fall under the female. And though these divine beings are themselves unbegotten, those who govern generation are likewise divided between these two categories, for the creative choir is plentiful throughout the universe. Channels of life, like sacred rivers, flow in abundance, some carrying the mark of the male, others of the female. There is no need to dwell overly long on this point, for even from the indivisible unities, whether masculine or feminine in nature, whole ranks of beings emerge and flow outward into the universe. That the ancient theologian acknowledged both the unity of divine rulership and the plurality of divine beings is evident not only from the foregoing ideas drawn from his own teachings, but also from the sacred verses that have been preserved. It is declared that within the ruler of all things is contained the entire cosmos, bright upper air, the lofty heavens, the endless sea in motion, the renowned earth, the boundless ocean, and the deep abyss. Springs and rivers, the vast deep, and all that fills the domains of nature are held within the divine. Every god and goddess of every rank, all that has been and all that shall be, are hidden within and united in the vast womb of the ruler of the skies. In the same tradition, there exists another sacred hymn, also recorded by those who studied the world's origin. Before quoting it, it was observed that the divine craftsman, filled with archetypal ideas, comprehended all things within himself, just as the ancient poet proclaimed. The verses continue with this proclamation: "The high king who thunders is both the beginning and the end. He is the center and the summit, and from him all beings arise, In him both male and female forms are joined, for he is at once man and maiden divine. He supports the firm foundation of the earth and embodies the deep brilliance of the starry heavens. He is the breath that moves through all, and his being lives within the ceaseless fire. He is the root of the sea and the light of the sun, and he is also the moon, the fair queen of night. This king rules unconfined, and from his fertile mind all things pour forth. One is the divine power known in all things, and one is the ruler, sovereign, and alone. All elements are enclosed in the divine body: fire, night and day, the earth, the water, and the sky. From him came love, the first of creators, and the shaping force of mind. All are held within his vast frame. His radiant head and bright countenance shine throughout the heavens, pouring forth boundless light. Around him flow golden locks formed from divine starlight. 2 horns extend from either side, like those of a bull, gleaming with celestial fire. Opposing one another, east and west stretch out as the paths of all the gods above. His eyes are the sun and moon, each with its borrowed light. His mind is pure truth, untouched by decay, kingly and eternal. His refined hearing catches every voice and every sound. His head and mind are deathless and luminous, while his body is vast, steadfast, and full of light. His limbs hold a power that subdues but is never itself overcome. The wide air surrounding the world shapes his shoulders, his back, and his noble chest. Throughout all existence, this ruler of the heavens soars upon swift and fated wings. His sacred belly is the earth, covered with fertile fields and mountains reaching the clouds. His middle form is the deep sea, whose roaring waves encircle the world. And in the shadowy depths below, the realms of darkness are upheld by his holy feet. For even the furthest bounds of the earth belong to him and serve as his firm foundation. Thus, all things were once held in the hidden depths of the divine, and from that secret fullness were brought into splendid light. These verses express what has often been called the central mystery of a certain ancient theology, the understanding that the divine is all things. This teaching, known among the Egyptians and later carried into Greece, holds a truth that has been affirmed by many contemplative minds. However, it is important to clarify that this view does not reduce the divine to a divisible or material nature. Rather, it asserts that the divine is all things because it is wholly and completely present everywhere and in everything, though its presence is experienced to greater or lesser degrees depending on the nature of the being in question. The divine is thus to be regarded as containing all things within itself, while remaining distinct and apart from them. It is the origin of all multiplicity, yet remains in itself an undivided unity. It is boundlessly generative, yet remains solitary in a way beyond human comprehension, and its goodness cannot be adequately expressed. As explained by a wise teacher, in the order of incorporeal beings, the divine, the intellect, and the soul each exist everywhere precisely because they are not confined to any particular place. Yet the divine, while being everywhere, is not situated within any being that comes after it in the order of reality. It simply is what it is, as it willed itself to be. Intellect resides within the divine, yet is not located in any one of its effects. Likewise, the soul is within both intellect and the divine, and yet not found in any place with respect to the physical. The body, on the other hand, exists within the soul, and within intellect, and within the divine itself. Although all beings and even the absence of being come from the divine and exist in it, the divine itself is neither these beings nor their opposites, nor does it reside within them. For if the divine existed everywhere and nowhere in the same manner, it would indeed be all things in all places. But because it is also nowhere in a particular sense, all things are brought forth from it. They exist in it because it is everywhere, yet they are distinct from it because it is nowhere. In the same way, intellect, being both everywhere and nowhere, gives rise to souls and to the realities beneath them, while remaining neither soul nor the things that come after soul, nor confined within them. This is because it pervades all its subordinate realities, while simultaneously not being bound to any of them. Similarly, the soul is not the body, nor is it within the body, but is instead the cause of body. For while soul is spread throughout the body, it is at the same time nowhere to be located within it. This unfolding of reality continues until it reaches a level of being that cannot be fully present everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, but only partially shares in both qualities. Elsewhere, the same source explains that when the ancients sought to describe the nature of an incorporeal essence as far as human language allows, they said it was one, yet also all things, that it was everywhere and yet nowhere, that it was wholly present within every complete being. They used such seemingly opposite descriptions to remove any mistaken notion that incorporeal realities could be compared to physical bodies, which obscure the very characteristics through which true being is known. The Platonic philosophers, in harmony with the teachings of Orpheus, regarded fecundity as a defining characteristic of divine nature, and from this principle they envisioned a universe teeming with divine beings. While this view might seem absurd to a modern philosopher or writer on mythology, one dismissing it in favor of mechanical explanations, the other rejecting it due to unexamined bias, such opinions deserve a fair hearing. Setting aside modern prejudice, it is worth considering the arguments of the philosophers themselves in defense of this doctrine. Onatus, a Pythagorean, contended that those who insist on the existence of only one God are mistaken. He argued that they fail to grasp that divine excellence is expressed not only in supreme unity, but also in the governance of beings similar in nature, surpassing them in power. He likened the subordinate gods to dancers following a lead performer, or soldiers obedient to their general. The harmony of their movement and the success of their efforts depend on such leadership. Without a leader, the dancers lose rhythm and the army its order. So too the divine cosmos, if it was stripped of its multiplicity. Plotinus similarly defended the idea of many gods beneath a singular, supreme deity. He held that while each person should strive toward goodness, they should also recognize that goodness is not theirs alone. There exist others who are good, including noble spirits and divine beings. These gods, though dwelling in the lower world, look toward a higher realm, especially to the blessed soul who governs the universe. From this awareness, one is drawn to honor the intelligible gods, and above all, their supreme king, whose majesty is not reduced by the multitude beneath him, but rather revealed through them. The divine remains one, yet from him proceed many, each dependent upon and reflective of his power. The entire universe exists through him, perpetually turning toward his divinity in concert with all the divine beings it contains. If one were to argue that the existence of these divine beings should be as demonstrable as that of the one supreme God, a suitable answer can be found in the reasoning of Proclus. He observed that souls tend to forget what lies nearest to them more readily than what is far superior, because the higher principles act upon them more forcefully due to their greater power. Just as the physical eye may fail to perceive what lies close on earth, yet clearly sees the distant stars because of their luminous clarity, so too the soul's vision is more easily dulled to nearby principles than to those more exalted. This explains why, across all religions and traditions, people acknowledge a single highest principle and call upon God for aid. Yet not all believe in a multitude of gods subordinate to this first cause, nor in the providence that flows from them through the universe, precisely because the one is more immediately evident to them than the many. Because of the Platonic doctrine affirming the soul's existence prior to its embodiment, it is not surprising that human beings possess so little knowledge of the divine and elevated beings that transcend them. Through immersion in the world of generation and the distractions of material life, the soul becomes clouded by forgetfulness, ignorance, and falsehood. It has been rightly observed that the condition of the soul resembles that of a traveler entering or departing a foreign land, laying aside the customs of its native place, and over time adopting foreign ways, affections, and laws that are alien to its true nature and divine origin. Thus, as it is not remarkable that most who dwell in a poisonous climate should suffer and decline, but that a few manage to retain their natural health, it should likewise not astonish us that, placed within the realm of generation, most souls become enslaved to passions and corrupted habits. Rather, what should cause wonder is that any soul, caught in the binding coils of the body and subject to endless worldly fluctuations, might remain temperate, untainted, and free from destructive confusion. Truly remarkable is the soul's capacity to live in a non-material way while surrounded by the material, to maintain its purity amidst defilement, to drink deeply from the cup of forgetfulness and yet not be overcome by its sleep-inducing draught, to lift its gaze above the darkened surroundings of the sensible world and turn inward toward the truths hidden within its essence. These truths are veiled and closed off by the images and distractions of earthly life, yet they reside within the soul itself. Still, it is indeed possible to attain a deeper knowledge of these higher natures than is commonly thought, through the aid of ancient philosophy, guided by a life in harmony with its principles. Such a path, though arduous, is noble, and worthy of pursuit by any mind drawn to the liberating pursuit of wisdom. Turning now to the topic of sacrifice as it was understood by Orpheus and the Platonic tradition, it is first necessary to clear away a common misjudgment. The Greek theologians and philosophers, contrary to the portrayals found in modern interpretations of mythology, were not so foolish as to confuse the created with the Creator, nor did they withhold due honor from the source of all. On the contrary, they believed that reverence shown to the most luminous of the divine offspring reflected glory upon the supreme cause. They carefully discerned the difference between the worship appropriate to the highest divinity and that which is fitting for the subordinate gods, as will become evident in the reflections that follow. Whether such beliefs can be reconciled with revealed doctrine is another matter entirely. What concerns us here is only to present their views clearly and accurately, to remove misrepresentations, and to show that even among the so-called pagans there were those in whom the divine left a witness. Regarding the origin and nature of sacrifice, there is no more fitting account than that preserved in the writings of one of their leading thinkers. He describes how in a distant time there arose among a most learned people inhabiting the sacred land shaped by the Nile a practice of offering sacrifices to the celestial gods, not with costly resins or rare perfumes, nor with exotic incense mingled with colored spices, for these came much later, introduced gradually through the growing errors of a humanity no longer burdened with the raw hardships of early life. At the beginning, when all was toil and uncertainty, such costly offerings were unknown, and sacrifices, if any, may have consisted of only the simplest gifts. Initially, people offered not fragrant smoke, but the first and tender shoots of green plants, plucked by hand, mosses and soft growths that symbolized fertility and life. In the natural order, the earth produced grasses and herbs before it brought forth trees or animals. Thus, before the fruits of trees, people gathered the leaves, roots, and early growth of plants and, offering them with fire, honored the visible celestial gods. Through the element of fire they transmitted sacred reverence to these luminous beings, preserving a perpetual flame in their temples as a reflection of the divine brilliance above. As for the use of herbal fumes, they employed vessels for burning them and had distinct terms to describe both the act and the materials of sacrifice. Yet later interpretations misunderstood these terms and imagined them to be signs of a decline into error, leading to the false assumption that sacrifice always meant the shedding of blood or the destruction of animals. In truth, the earliest offerings were pure and symbolic, oriented towards celestial beings and carried out with fire, herbs, and sincere reverence, not cruelty or destruction. The ancients took great care to preserve their original customs, and even pronounced curses against those who abandoned the old ways in favor of new practices. This is why the herbs now used for fumigation came to be called aromatics. The age-old nature of these fumigations becomes clear when one observes that even today various fragrant woods, cut into pieces, are used in sacrifices. Since the earth, which now bears trees alongside grass, its earliest growth, initially produced few edible fruits like those of the oak, people in the earliest times offered only a small number of these in sacrifices, while burning mostly leaves. As human life grew gentler and diets changed, sacrifices began to include nuts, giving rise to the proverb meaning, "enough of the oak." With the emergence of cultivated grains such as barley, people made their first offerings by sprinkling whole grains in sacrifice. Later, when barley was ground into meal, a process considered sacred and veiled in mystery, they began to cast the meal into the fire as a more valued offering than the whole grain. This custom still survives in the use of meal mixed with wine and oil at the close of sacrifices. Such practices reveal the humble origins from which sacrifices have grown to their present form, though people often neglect to consider the deeper reasons behind them. As human agriculture flourished and the earth produced abundant crops and fruits, it became customary to offer the first yield of all these things to the gods, intending to honor the various divine ranks. Many different offerings were selected for this purpose, often combined with others chosen for their beauty or pleasing fragrance, suitable to the senses of the divine. Some of these were woven into garlands that adorned the statues of the gods, while others were burned as sacrifices. Likewise, sacred liquids such as wine, honey, and oil were poured out to the gods as soon as their uses were discovered. The truth of this account is supported by the procession still held in Athens in honor of the sun and the hours, where grasses entwining olive kernels, figs, various pulses, oak branches or acorns, strawberries, wheat, barley, dried figs, and cakes made from wheat and barley meal arranged in pyramid shapes are carried, followed by olives. This tradition recalls the ancient respect for these natural offerings. Critiques of animal sacrifice also arose, emphasizing that the greatest utility belongs to fruits and plants. The first fruits of these, it was said, should be offered to the gods and to the earth, the fertile mother of every herb. Earth is regarded as a common hearth shared by gods and humans alike, its fertile surface a nurturing bosom akin to that of a mother or nurse. It is proper, therefore, to celebrate her divinity with hymns and approach her with filial reverence as the source of all life. By doing so, when mortal life comes to its end, humans may be deemed worthy of reception into the celestial realms and fellowship with the immortal gods, who watch over those who honor them with these offerings, recognizing that not everything is suitable to be given as a testimony of devotion. Not everything is equally suitable to be offered in sacrifice to the gods, and indeed, it may be impossible to find anything truly worthy enough to worship them as they deserve. Building on this idea, the approach to sacrifice for those who aim at an intellectual life as their highest goal is explained. One should also sacrifice, but in a manner fitting to beings born of intellect, bringing with them the most exalted offerings and employing their highest faculties. To the supreme divinity, who is beyond all things, it is said by a wise voice that nothing material or sensible should be sacrificed or dedicated, for nothing composed of matter can be pure to a nature entirely free from bodily contamination. Therefore, even spoken words are not proper when addressing such a sublime and ineffable cause, nor is the soul's inner speech appropriate if disturbed or mingled with any sensory images or imaginative distractions. Instead, the supreme God ought to be worshipped in deepest and purest silence, with the most perfect thoughts regarding divine greatness. It is necessary, then, to unite and assimilate oneself with this highest principle, approaching it with a sacred sacrifice that honors its glory and secures our well-being. Such a sacrifice is possible only through contemplating divinity with a soul untouched by material passions, and with the rational eye illuminated by intellectual light. To the divine beings derived from this first God, the intelligible divinities, one should offer hymns composed by reason. It is a common practice to present the first fruits of all blessings received from the gods, those by which they sustain and nourish our existence, and that serve the aims of sacrifice. Just as a farmer performs sacred rites by offering handfuls of pulses and fruits, so too should one sacrifice pure thoughts and other souls' goods, expressing gratitude to the divinities for the sublime contemplations they grant us. These divine gifts cultivate the intellect with the study of their essences. They commune with us and reveal themselves to our mental vision, illuminating us with divine radiance and thus securing true salvation. However, many who engage in philosophy do so lazily, more devoted to gaining fame than to honoring the divinity. They focus entirely on statues, without concern for how or whether these intellectual beings should be adored. Nor do they properly attend to divine matters, or seek to understand the extent to which they should strive for union with these exalted natures. Such people are not opposed here, as the true aim is to gain knowledge of divinity and emulate the pious and ancient ones by frequently offering sacrifice through contemplation granted by the gods, through which we participate in genuine salvation. The Pythagoreans, who devoted great study to numbers and lines, often offered sacrifices to the gods in the form of these very numbers. They assigned names to each number, calling one Minerva, another Apollo, and others Justice or Temperance. They applied the same practice to geometrical figures. Through such sacrifices, named according to the divinities they honored, they sought to obtain specific favors. These invocations were frequently used in divination, and when a particular matter needed investigation, they turned to the visible celestial gods, the wandering and fixed stars, with the sun regarded as their chief, followed by the moon. It was also recommended, according to a certain theologian, to include fire closely joined with these celestial bodies. This same source explains that the Pythagoreans never sacrificed animals, but instead offered the first fruits of flour, honey, and various earthly produce. They did not light fires on bloodied altars or perform rites involving similar matters. But why repeat such accounts? One truly devoted to piety understands why living beings should not be sacrificed to the gods, but only to genii and other powers superior to humans, whether benevolent or malevolent. Such a person also understands who may rightly perform these sacrifices and under what conditions, regarding those beings who require such offerings. On other details, silence is preferable. What some Platonists have revealed sheds clear light on this topic and can be summarized as follows. The first God, being incorporeal, immovable, and indivisible, does not exist in any particular being, place, or time, nor is it bounded or encompassed by anything, including itself. Therefore, this divine essence lacks nothing external to its nature. This same characteristic also belongs to the soul of the world, which, though possessing a threefold division and naturally self-moving, chooses to move in an orderly and beautiful way. It moves the physical structure of the world according to the highest and most harmonious principles. Although incorporeal and entirely free from passion, it is nevertheless united with and encircled by a body. To other gods, to the world, and to the wandering and fixed stars, beings composed of both body and soul, and to the visible divinities, thanks should be offered through sacrifices of inanimate substances. Beyond these, there exists a vast number of invisible beings, which Plato broadly terms daimons. Some among these receive specific names from humans and are honored with divine reverence and religious rites. Others lack particular names and are obscurely worshipped by certain individuals, often associated with particular districts or streets of cities. The rest are known simply by the general term daimons. It is commonly believed that if these beings are angered by neglect of their usual worship, their influence becomes harmful and malignant, but if they are appeased by prayers, supplications, sacrifices, and proper rites, they turn beneficial and protective. There exists a confused and often dishonorable opinion regarding these beings, which demands that their nature be clearly distinguished through reason. According to this understanding, these beings are classified as follows. Those souls that proceed from the universal soul and govern significant parts of the realms beneath the lunar sphere, connected to an aerial element yet ruled by reason, are regarded as good daimons. It is to be believed that all their actions aim at the benefit of the domains under their care, whether they oversee certain animals, fruits assigned to them, or related things such as fruitful rains, gentle winds, clear weather, and all that contributes to a favorable climate and seasons. They also provide humans with the use of music and various disciplines, along with medicinal and physical training arts, and all things allied to these. It is impossible for such daimons to supply what is fitting and beneficial, while at the same time causing destruction and harm. Within this category are the messengers, called so by Plato, who serve as intermediaries between gods and humans. They carry our prayers and sacred offerings to the gods as judges of our conduct, and return to us divine warnings, exhortations, and oracles. Conversely, souls that fail to properly govern their aerial part, but are instead mostly overcome by its influence, agitated and driven rashly by its brutal power whenever the turbulent passions and desires of this pneumatic part become strong, are rightly called daimons, but should also be labeled malevolent and base. All these beings, together with others who hold opposing powers, are invisible and wholly imperceptible to human senses. They are not encased in solid bodies like earthly animals, nor do they all share a single form. Rather, they possess various forms. Sometimes the forms impressed on their aerial part are visible. At other times they are hidden. Evil daimons often change their shapes. This aerial part, insofar as it is corporeal, is subject to passion and change, and although it is restrained by the controlling power of these demoniacal souls so that its form endures for some time, it is not eternal. It is reasonable to believe that something constantly flows from this aerial part, which receives nourishment suited to its nature. The aerial part of the good daimons exists in a certain harmonious proportion, similar to the bodies of things perceived by our senses. In contrast, the bodies of malevolent daimons possess a discordant nature, causing them to dwell in the aerial region near the earth with a passive but malignant influence. For the most part, they govern their domains with turbulent cruelty. Thus, there is no evil they do not attempt to bring about. Their behavior is entirely violent and deceitful, lacking the protective care of the better daimons, and they devise sudden and fierce traps to ensnare the unwary. Sometimes they try to hide their attacks, and sometimes they act with open violence against those they oppress. After an extensive discussion on sacrifice, particularly the kind performed through contemplation and sacred hymns, attention turns to the nature of prayer as preserved in an esteemed commentary on the Timaeus. It is stated that before anything else, it is necessary to clearly understand what prayer essentially is, what its perfection consists of, and from where it naturally arises within the soul. The view presented draws on ancient opinions about prayer, some approving and others rejecting it. Those who deny the existence of the gods claim no benefit from prayer, and neither do those who admit the gods' existence but deny their providential care for the universe. Additionally, there are those who accept both the gods and their providence but consider all events as necessary and unchangeable. Such persons reject the utility of prayer because it pertains only to contingent matters that might have different outcomes. Only those who acknowledge the existence of gods, their ongoing providence, and the possibility of contingent events that could unfold differently truly affirm the value of prayer, recognizing that the gods guide and secure human life. Prayer is particularly fitting for worthy individuals, for it unites them with the divine, since like seeks like, a virtuous person shares a likeness with divine nature. Moreover, good souls, confined and imprisoned within the dark bonds of the body, should pray to the gods to be permitted to depart this earthly existence. Since humans are like children separated from their true intellectual parents, the gods, prayer is a means of requesting reunion with those divine sources. To deny prayer, and thus prevent the soul's union with the gods, is akin to being deprived of one's parents. Historically, all cultures known for wisdom have embraced divine prayers. The Brahmins in India, the Magi in Persia, and among the Greeks, those most skilled in theology who established sacred mysteries and initiatory rites. Furthermore, since humans are part of the universe, it is reasonable that they depend upon it for support. Aligning oneself with the universe brings safety to all it contains. Therefore, possessing virtue means invoking the divinity that embodies all virtue. Universal good is the source of the particular good one shares in. If one seeks corporeal benefits, the universe, as a whole body, contains the power to provide. Hence, perfection must extend to all parts as it does to the whole. These profound reflections showcase the excellence of this ancient philosopher's insight into sacred matters, a level of understanding rarely surpassed in philosophy. When asked about the nature of the power of prayer according to these philosophers, the answer lies in a certain sympathy and likeness of natures to one another. It is similar to an extended chord where, when the lowest string is moved, the highest responds in turn. Or like the strings of a musical instrument tuned to the same harmony, one string vibrates from the motion of another, as if it shares sensation through their sympathy. In the universe, there is one harmony composed of opposites, since these contraries are at once similar and connected. From the soul of the world, which resembles an immortal self-moving lyre, life resounds everywhere, more clearly in some things, less perfectly in others. Regarding the divine beings beyond the world, sympathy and likeness exist as in their most perfect forms, which sensible and imperfect natures partake of as dim reflections. Therefore, it should not be thought that our prayers cause any change or attention in the gods, or that they literally bring down divine favor. Rather, prayers serve to elevate the soul toward these divine beings and prepare it to receive their higher illumination. The divine radiance that occurs in prayer shines and works spontaneously, restoring unity to the soul and causing human energy to become one with divine energy. This is the true efficacy of prayer. It unites all lower beings with the higher. As it has been said, all things pray except the first principle. The power of likeness is so great that, through its unifying nature, all things come together and share their specific qualities with one another. Primary natures bestow their gifts on secondary ones through abundant illumination, and effects influence their causes in return. Everywhere, the inseparable connection and harmonious society between active universals and passive particulars is observed. The generative causes of things are found by likeness in their effects, and within causes, their offspring exist in perfect union and agreement. Hence, the heavenly spheres pour down a rich abundance of good into this earthly realm, while the sublunary parts, in some measure similar to the heavens, share a perfection suited to their nature. From this progression of likeness, there are various leaders in the universe, orders of angels moving in harmony around their ruling deities, along with many daimons, heroes, and individual souls. There are also diverse kinds of mortal animals and numerous powers within plants. All things tend toward their respective leaders and bear, as it were, a mark of shared domestic unity, which is more obvious in some and more hidden in others. Likeness in the primary causes is clearer, but in those of middle and lower orders it becomes obscured due to the degrees of progression. Images and exemplars draw their being from this harmonizing likeness, and through it, everything is familiar to itself and to its kindred natures. Having thus considered this, it is fitting to return to the topic of sacrifice and prayer. To better understand their nature and power, one may turn to the thoughtful and subtle insights of a noted philosopher on sacrifice and magic, whose words may be paraphrased here. Just as lovers gradually ascend from the beauty seen in sensible forms to that which is divine, so did the ancient priests, perceiving a certain alliance and sympathy among natural things and between the manifest and the hidden powers, discover that all things exist within all others. From this mutual sympathy and similarity, they developed a sacred science. They understood the supreme in the subordinate, and the subordinate in the supreme. In the heavens, earthly properties exist in a causal and celestial way, while on earth celestial properties appear in a terrestrial manner. Consider how to explain the plants called heliotropes, those attendants of the sun, which move in harmony with its orbit, and the selenotropes, or attendants of the moon, turning precisely in accord with her motion. This occurs because all things pray and compose hymns to the leaders of their orders, some intellectually, others rationally, some naturally, others through the senses. The sunflower, for example, moves in a circular dance toward the sun as much as it can, so that if one could hear the vibration its movement produces in the air, it would sound like a hymn honoring its king, as much as a plant is capable of composing. Thus, the sun and moon are visible in the earth, but manifest according to earthly qualities. Yet in the celestial regions, all plants, stones, and animals possess an intellectual life, in keeping with their celestial nature. The ancients, reflecting on this mutual sympathy, applied both celestial and terrestrial natures for hidden purposes, and through a certain likeness, they drew divine virtues into this lower realm. Indeed, likeness alone is enough to bind things together in union and agreement. For example, if a piece of paper is heated and then brought near a lamp without touching the flame, it will suddenly catch fire, and the flame will descend from the higher to the lower parts. This heated paper can be likened to a certain relation of the inferior to the superior, while its approach to the lamp symbolizes the timely and appropriate use of things in accordance with place, time, and matter. The spreading of fire in the paper aptly represents the presence of divine light in a nature capable of receiving it. Finally, the paper's ignition may be compared to the deification of mortals and the illumination of material natures, which, like the fire in the paper, are lifted upward by participation in a divine seed. Similarly, the lotus before sunrise folds its leaves inward, then gradually unfolds them as the sun rises, spreading them fully at its zenith, and slowly folding them again as the sun sets in the west. Through this expansion and contraction, the plant honors the sun much like humans do through the movement of their eyelids and lips. This imitation and participation in the heavenly light is not only seen in plants, which possess a faint life, but also in certain stones. The sunstone, with its golden rays, imitates those of the sun, while the stone called the eye of heaven or eye of the sun has a shape resembling a pupil, with a ray shining from its center. Likewise, the lunar stone, shaped like a crescent moon, changes to follow the lunar motion. The stone known as helioselenus, meaning of the sun and moon, imitates in its own way the union of these two luminaries, reflected in its color. Thus, all things are imbued with divine natures. Terrestrial beings receive the fullness of those that are celestial, while celestial beings partake in supercelestial essences. Every order of existence unfolds in a beautiful descent, from the highest to the lowest. What is unified above the order of things then unfolds below, with various souls distributed under their respective divine rulers. Some things turn in harmony with the sun's revolutions, while others imitate the sun's rays, such as the palm and the date, and others still display the fiery nature of the sun, like the laurel, or express other distinctive qualities. Indeed, the properties gathered in the sun are distributed throughout subsequent natures arranged in a solar hierarchy: angels, demons, souls, animals, plants, and stones alike. From these observable facts, the ancient priests discovered the worship of superior powers, mixing and purifying elements as needed. They mingled many substances because certain simple materials, though not individually, possessed a divine property sufficient to invoke the power in which they participated. By combining many things, they drew down a heavenly influence, and by forming one from many, they symbolized the unity above the many. They crafted statues from mixtures of diverse substances united by sympathy and harmony. Similarly, they gathered composite fragrances through divine art into a single essence that embodied many powers, symbolizing the unity of the divine. Understanding that division weakens these powers, while their combination restores them to the likeness of their original form, the ancient priests collected virtues by mutual relation and sympathy, expelling what was incompatible. When necessary, they purified with substances like sulfur and bitumen and sprinkled marine water, sulfur to temper sharpness of odor, and marine water due to its fiery element. In their worship, they offered animals and other substances suited to the gods' natures, first invoking the powers of daimons, which are closest to natural substances and operations, through whose aid they called natural bodies into their presence. They then moved from daimons to the powers and energies of the gods, partly guided by daemonic instruction and partly by their own diligent interpretation of symbols, ascending to a true understanding of the divine. Finally, they set aside natural substances and their operations, and entered into communion and fellowship with the gods themselves. This account reveals the theological doctrine attributed to Orpheus and preserved by later Platonists. It demonstrates that the Greek theology as understood by the philosophers is far from the absurd and nonsensical system often portrayed by modern prejudice and ignorance. Unfortunately, a misguided zeal frequently leads to the ridicule of ancient philosophical opinions to bolster the certainty of Christian religion. Yet true revelation does not require such weak support, which only invites suspicion about its evidence or the clarity of its doctrines. Moreover, most critics who dismiss these teachings lack genuine knowledge of the Platonic writings, the only reliable source on this profound and complex subject, from which the foregoing discourse has drawn so richly. If these priceless works were more widely known and understood, they would not only refine a currently degraded taste, but also foster admiration for the strength of human reason. They would encourage greater humility in claims to wisdom, silence ignorant critics, and halt the flood of modern philosophical writings destined to be forgotten, like streams returning to the ocean from which they came.